There was a time when I was trying to learn Adobe programs and generally all things graphic design. I felt like it is an important skill to have and almost everyone can find some way to use it. I've been feeling this gap of the things I was interested in and wanting to make and actually knowing how to do it for some time. Some software just didn't feel natural enough, especially Adobe and Adobe Photoshop. So I joined some online courses and wanted to keep the knowledge even when I wasn't actively using the programs. Bearing in mind that I'm a visual learner with a love for just pen and paper, I created this notebook that I'm gonna go and show you. This notebook actually I found in an abandoned school in the countryside, and it does look a bit scrappy from the outside because I had to put some ugly looking tape on it. It's an old one, not the best for durability and usability, but I wouldn't change it even a bit. You can see that it was made in Liepai's paper factory and costs about 55 cents in currency of Soviet Union, as it is written down in Russian, and let's just assume this notebook is pretty damn old. In the beginning, I started with notes on Photoshop. You can see that the first pages look scattered and messy. The course I did was on LinkedIn Learning. Unfortunately, even if it was good, it wasn't organized in the best way for me to keep notes on point in real time while doing this course. If I had to go back and find something Photoshop related, I think I'd have a hard time in doing so. I guess there are some titles in place, but they don't stand out that much. But I did feel like I have gaps of knowledge there, and after finishing this course, something in my brain just clicked. Like it all just made sense. In a very logical way, all the pieces were assembled together. Here you can see that the system slowly had started developing. Now, besides the titles, there were also markings on some tools that would actually be most helpful in the future. With the tool symbols acting partly as title, I would be able to either go back to a certain topic by a title and context, or by a reversing process and starting with a specific tool. I found it fun and useful to copy the whole window of the software just because sometimes there was so much context. I was not only able to explain to my future self how do certain things work, but also find the correct page and supporting content way faster. I did a similar thing for the blending modes, and I found it very useful later on. Writing down all the awesome blending modes helped me to structure and reference once I found some new use for them. I use this one not just when I'm using Photoshop. Another page of Camera Raw. You might have noticed that there are some page numbers as well. I added them later on. I did find a need for them, but that I'll explain a bit down the line. So now we've got to page 64, and I don't have more of Photoshop. I think the Photoshop and Illustrator were a couple of years apart, and it took me a long time to realize that I liked Illustrator more and I wanted to do the same deep dive into it, starting from complete fundamentals. Generally, what I've come across at this moment is that I mostly use Lightroom for image edits and Illustrator for specific design projects with Photoshop, being used only when there's a specific necessity for it. This course and all the upcoming ones I took on Skillshare. Yes, everyone's endorsing it nowadays. But I basically found one teacher with the best content and longest video courses, and it ended up great. As these are fundamentals, I didn't skip anything, from opening file to units. You can see some titles here and some sections. I mean, it's still a bit messy, but this notebook wasn't born to be an Instagram star or anything. You can see that emphasizing the Illustrator tools using them as titles makes it seem more perceivable. I also adopted writing down the certain tool, drawing a symbol, so it can be found quickly and noting the shortcuts. I added some examples as well. Sometimes it would help not only to understand the topic better, but also they would serve a purpose, giving me some visual cues. Sometimes it's easier to find a drawing than a title or a text. And now we can see the part 2 of Illustrator. It's called an advanced course, but I would just call it a deep dive. And this was the moment when I decided to add these references that would point me to a specific page in the notebook. And this is where and why I use the page numbers in this notebook. For example, the pen tool. There's a bit of in-depth information about it, but that is not the first time I've covered it. Here you can see quite a bit of references. Also, we touch more on the workflow, which I think is a very important step not to be skipped on. I've got this marker here that marks a new course, which makes it easier to find and separate sections. This is still Illustrator, but the course I did was about UI and web design, and it's not about Illustrator, but how to use it in this context. It was a very good follow-up to the previous courses. Then I looked into an alternative of Illustrator for UI and web design, Adobe XD. It was another separate course, and this was the first time I ever used Adobe XD. This, I would say, is the most organized part of the notebook, as it has very clear enumeration of titles, headings, and a strong hierarchy. It also helped that the organization of the course was through making a project from beginning to end, so it made it so much easier to follow along to. And there are some references here as well, mostly to Illustrator. I've got some references to websites and resources as well. I also had a quick look at Sketch, as it's very similar to XD, but it's not a part of Adobe. I thought it might be useful to have a look at that as well. And now we're getting to InDesign. I put it in its own section as its own program, even if it's a little bit similar to Illustrator or Photoshop. It has a lot to do with publishing, so it's in a bit different niche. I wasn't sure what to expect from this course, but the structure, I think that has improved a lot since the first pages of this notebook. Hey, so that's it. I have a couple of spare pages left and a couple pages in the end. Back when I just did Photoshop, I thought I would dedicate the opposite side of notebook to video editing, but writing down notes on Premiere Pro ended up being a notorious task, as it's just too many options and little tools and symbols everywhere, and I think I would need a bigger notebook for that if I ever decide to learn it in such a crazy manner. So that's it. That's my notebook with some treasures inside.